Hi, this is Jennifer Lewis,
My name's Katie Richards.
and we are presenting the 605 Ethical Dilemma for our class, and this is going to be in reference to a dilemma that occurred in our field practicum. So what the issue that we're presenting today is about a client that was actually working through the addictions group, and he has been attending addictions for the past several months. He was attending motivational interviewing, and through that process, he was doing well, and he had actually moved up to the Matrix group, the Matrix Addictions group, and he continued to do well in that group as well. And while attending that group, when he attended one of the group meetings, he was, the entire group was requested to do a drug screen, and it was an oral drug screen. And following group, the client, that particular client, had a meeting with his case manager. So during case management, that particular client admitted to having a relapse over the weekend. So after he admitted to that, and case management processed that with him and talked to him about that, after he had his appointment and that ended, case management then went and talked to his therapist about it. The therapist then spoke with case management. They kind of had a discussion about it. And then at that point, the therapist was trying to determine what the best case scenario should be for her client at that particular time. And the ethical dilemma that she was dealing with was the client had already admitted that he had relapsed. He had admitted to doing it, unfortunately, after he had already taken the drug screen. So she knew that there was going to be a positive drug screen. And he is currently in probation at this time. She had concerns that a relapse might send him, him going back to jail could send him back into relapse again. So she was trying to determine whether or not the screen should be pulled, and she should just document that he told her that he had a relapse, or told the case manager that he had a relapse over the weekend, or what the situation should be there. So she was trying to figure out what would be in the best interest of her client at that particular point in time.
Okay, so in order to really get through all of this information that we just talked about, we are going to use the Elaine Congress Ethical Model of Decision Making. It's a 5-step ethical model, and it spells out ethic, ETHIC. So the first one is E, and it's evaluate relevant personal, societal, agency, client, and professional values. So the personal values, so that's of the clinician, could be withholding a drug screen may cost the clinician their license. I think that's a pretty important personal value. Societal, clinicians should work potentially in the best interest of their client. That could be what the clinician really feels like what society is expecting. The agency, they have a policy that states potentially that drug tests or any sort of information like that cannot be withheld. The client, so the client probably does not want to go back to jail, and he admitted that he'd relapsed before the screen came back positive. However, I think it's important to know that he didn't admit that he relapsed until after knowing that he was being drug screened. Professional values. As a clinician and in the NASW, you don't want to cause the client to relapse by being sent back to jail. However, you're obligated to submit all information regarding the client's progress with recovery. So the next step is T, and Jen will dive into that with the NASW Code of Ethics.
So with the Code of Ethics, what you're looking at, you're going to want to think about what the ethical standards are regarding the NASW code. So with that, the first one that we want to talk about is 1.01, and that has to do with promoting the well-being of the client. So one of the things that the therapist consistently spoke about in this particular instance is what was in the best interest of her client, because she was concerned about whether or not she should set him up for failure, because he did admit to relapsing. However, if she went ahead and set the drug screen in, it could possibly mean that he would end up going to jail, and he could then end up relapsing even further. So she had concerns about whether or not making that decision would would not be in the best interest of her client. So the other thing that we have to look at is 2.03. Case managers and therapists need to communicate as that team. They have to communicate with one another for the best interest of the client. Another code of ethic that we need to look at is 2.10. Social workers should prevent, expose, and discourage any unethical behavior of other colleagues. 3.01, case managers and therapists should consult with any supervisors. So in this particular instance, if there was a supervisor that she could have spoken with in regards to this particular situation, she could have had the opportunity to kind of get their idea, or at the very least, possibly speak to other colleagues in regards to this situation to determine what would be in the best interest of her client. Kind of have that sounding board to get an idea of what would be an option, or at least talk about options, what would be the best interest for the client. And then the other ethical consideration that we're looking at is 3.04. Social workers should ensure that records are accurate. I mean, that needs to be taken into consideration as well. She did indicate that either way she was going to have to document that he had disclosed that. Obviously, the case manager was going to disclose that in her main progress notes that she had met with him. She was also going to need to document that she had let the therapist know about that information as well. So the other thing that we have to look at is 3.09, a commitment to employers and employing agencies. So it's not just about the commitment to the community mental health agency, it's also about the commitment to the agency that they're working for, which in this case would have been the probation office. And the very last one is 4.04, social workers should not condone or be dishonest or participate in fraud.
So the next step is H, hypothesize about the possible consequences of different decisions. So the two different decisions that I'm going to break this step into is sending the test in or not sending the test in. So sending the test in, what are some of the possible consequences of that? The client could go to jail. You could ruin the client-clinician relationship. The client could go further into their relapse and get even worse. So what are the consequences of not sending the test in? You may lose your license. You are breaking company policies. You may lose your job at the very least, if not your license, which I think you just kind of have to weigh those pros and cons. So the next one is identify who will benefit and who will be harmed in view of social work's commitment to the most vulnerable. So sending the test in, who's going to be harmed? The client will go to jail. The client may relapse in jail. The clinician relationship with client may be broken. The benefit of sending the test in, the clinician doesn't lose their license or their job. They're not breaking policies, and the client is being held accountable for their relapse. Who's going to be harmed and benefit when you don't send the test in? The clinician may lose their license. That's a harm of not sending the test in, or their job, and the client's not being held accountable for their actions. The clinician's breaking their own ethics and their agency's ethics and policies. A benefit of not sending the test in, the client doesn't go to jail, the client-clinician relationship may not be damaged, and the client may not relapse even worse. So the very last step is consult with a supervisor and your colleagues to make the most ethical choice. What happened in the situation that we've been talking about is they did send in the test. I proposed a even further potential solution, which I think will help to eliminate some things. So you don't withhold sending in the test, but you pull in the client and let them know that you'll be writing the probation officer, letting them know that the client is closed before you got the positive results back, and really try to advocate on your client's behalf in order to save that client-clinician relationship. And hopefully, if the client does end up going to jail for this, you'll still be able to give them treatment and reduce the risk of relapse within. However, you're still giving the drug screen in, so you're not risking your own license and breaking policies. So that concludes
our presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.